The top cop who put his badge on the line for justice.
The gripping story of Deputy Sheriff Doug Poppa. He was a top cop who did the right thing and paid dearly for it.
You know the name Doug Poppa?
Yes, I do. God bless Doug Poppa, an honest cop.
He was a man of integrity. His testimony last summer freed an innocent man from jail who had already been convicted of shooting his ex-wife. But Poppa's going public cost him his job as an undercover cop.
I was elated, of course. But then as he testified, I was somewhat concerned for him because I knew that they were probably going to crucify that man.
Doug Poppa was targeted for a 10-day suspension by his own department for defying superiors and talking to the media. This Brooklyn-born street fighter wouldn't back down.
Sometimes the truth has a price. That may be the lesson of a Virginia police officer who says, in trying to do the right thing, he ended up paying for it.
The message you're sending is, see, we did it, Doug. You don't come out, you don't buck the system. No matter what the reason is, you just can basically keep your mouth shut. But if I wouldn't do it all over again, I would take the badge and I would leave it on somebody's desk and get out of police work. Because the day I can't tell the truth because somebody's pressuring me, and the day the system doesn't want me to tell the truth because somebody's pressuring me, is the day I'd leave the badge on the desk and walk away.
Poppa was fired for insubordination. One man who confronted truth and consequences.
The problem is that the atmosphere does not yet exist in which an honest police officer can act without fear of ridicule or reprisal from fellow officers. We must create an atmosphere in which the dishonest officer fears the honest one, and not the other way around. I hope that this investigation, and any future ones, will deal with corruption at all levels within the department, and not limit themselves to cases involving individual patrolmen. I hope that police officers in the future will not experience the same frustration and anxiety that I was subjected to for the past 5 years at the hands of my superiors because of my attempt to report corruption.
I feel any time a police officer comes forward and tries to do something about injustice in his department, that he needs support.
He says it's crucial protections are in place for whistleblowers who go public with incriminating information.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Truth and, I changed the name of the podcast. It's now the Doug Poppa Podcast for Wednesday, February 15th, 2022. Today's guest, ladies and gentlemen, we have on the show again is retired NYPD Detective Frank Serpico. As you all know, Frank Serpico is the first police officer in American history to come out and expose widespread police corruption in a police department. Frank, you there?
Yeah. Hi, Doug. Thanks for having me.
How's it going? Ladies and gentlemen, let me say something before we get into this podcast. Originally, Frank and I were going to talk about NYPD Detective Robert Lucy, who was a corrupt cop and then worked undercover. They made a movie about him and wrote a book called The Prince of the City. We're also going to discuss Frank's friend, Sergeant Joseph Tromboli, former NYPD sergeant who passed away last year, and he was involved with the Mullen Commission. He did the investigation on corrupt cop Michael Dowd years ago. But something else came up, and that's going to be the topic today. We'll talk about those other two subjects at another podcast. Frank's partner, Arthur Caesar, C-E-S-A-R-E, and I'll hold the book up here to the camera. He wrote a book that was published in 2013, and it was called, you see here, Iron Man in Blue. I read this book, and he says at the beginning of the book that it's a work of fiction. Any resemblance to any actual persons living or dead or locales is entirely coincidental or are the product of the author's imagination. Now that's fine. When you write a book of fiction, that's what you would put in the book. The problem is, there's things in this book that are not fiction. He has a whole chapter titled Frank Serpico. Frank Serpico is not a fictional character. He's a real man. He's a human being. And so I'm going to get into this book. Frank, you read the book. You got it, I think, after I did. And let's start out. What are your thoughts on this book, on the chapter that's in there?
Well, first of all, I was really taken aback that, I don't know if your listeners are aware, but in 2017, some guy named Antonino D'Ambrosio did a documentary about me. And also, unbeknownst to me, he got a hold of Arthur Caesar, my partner that was with me the night I got shot. And D'Ambrosio never told me that he actually had a copy of this book, which I had never heard of. And if he had a copy of this book, why the hell didn't he show it to me? And even without showing it to me, he could have ripped Caesar a new asshole, because the crap that he's got in there is just defies imagination. So, number one is with this director who I never got along with, because he was going to prove in the beginning, he was all hot and bothered that he was going to prove that my shooting was a setup. And he had lawyers and everything, and I said, well, that's good. I said, but you're never going to do it. But what you can show is that there was never any 1013, officer down, that they never called for a backup. What the hell else do you have to know? So anyway, one day, I went to Manhattan, and there was Caesar. We met in this little cigar store. So you can see that in the documentary. So getting back to the night in question, you want me to take it from there, or you want to? Should I give my account of what happened?
Yeah, give your account of what happened that night, and then and I'm going to get into the book after that. But let the listeners know, because some people may not be aware of what happened to you that night in your own words. So go ahead and tell us, recount what happened according to your recollection on the night of February 3rd, 1971. The address was 778 Driggs Avenue in the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn, and you were the door in question, the apartment in question, is apartment 3G. So go ahead and take it, Frank.
Yeah. So, again, I don't want to go off on a tangent. We can cover this at another time, because this is not, in my opinion, this is a total police cover-up of what happened the night I got shot. And I have further evidence of that we can discuss at another time, because a former New York City deputy police commissioner named James Fife and a national police expert totally distorted the facts, what happened that night. So now, I had been assigned with Caesar and Haley and was the other guy?
Rotman.
What was it?
Rotman.
Rotman, yeah.
Gary Rotman.
From the, and now, when I first met my sergeant, my supervisor in narcotics, this is what he said to me. He said, listen, Serpico, you don't pull the shit you pulled up there, meaning the Bronx, where I just come from, where I had testified before a grand jury about the corruption. And he says, that was chicken shit. Down here, meaning Brooklyn North, we're talking about real money. And with that, you don't fuck around. Do I make myself clear? I said, thanks for the leg up, Sarge. So now, Doug, this is my introduction to narcotics. Who the hell can I trust?
Right.
So I've been working with these guys. We were, serving warrants and making arrests. Now, one day they said to me, as narcotics cops, you pretty much make your own schedule. You don't work a 9 to 5 or around the clock, depending on your information, and whatever. So they called me up and they said, we're going to make a collar tonight, so we'll meet you at the 80th precinct, which was actually my mother's home precinct where I grew up as a kid. And we'll take it from there. So I go there and they pick me up and they take me to their informant's house. They said they had an informant, and we go to his house, and he had a very nice wife. She wasn't a druggie, and the informant wasn't a runny-nosed junkie either, which I think was totally distorted. And the wife, she was Puerto Rican, and she offered to make us coffee. And, they made like faces, they weren't going to touch that shit. And I said, yeah, mucho gusto. And she made me a nice cup of coffee. And then we went to the location, and the story was we were supposed to be sitting in the car, and when somebody made a buy, the dealer's name was supposed to be Mambo, and that was his nickname. Last name was Echeverra. The informant would be standing outside the apartment house, and if the guys were dirty, he would take off his glasses and wipe them. So we're sitting in the car, and a lady goes up. She comes down. She was carrying a shopping bag. He takes off his glasses, and I get out of the car. They zoom after her, and they come back. What happened? They didn't find anything. So I don't know how they were going to search a female anyway. But so now we're back in the car, and we're waiting, nothing. And so finally they decide I should go knock on the door, get the door open for them. Meanwhile, people, not a lot, coming in. It was late at night. And I went upstairs. I was on the, between the third and fourth floor landing. I could look over the banister. There's like a space, and, I could see the door, lower half of the door without. So I see a couple of guys come up there, and they make a buy. And so as soon as they are out of sight, I go up the stairs and I flash them with the flashlight. And they picked the guys up and put them in the car and left them with Haley. So now they come upstairs, and we all got our guns drawn, and Caesar is on my right on the top of the stairwell, but you can't, if anybody opens the door, they can't see him because there's a wall there. But Roatman was on my left. Now, if you can see from the photo, the hallway is only 2 doors wide. there's no room there. So that had to be like max 10 feet, not even, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he's practically next to me, but he's against the wall to my left, and I'm on the right. And I got my Smith and Wesson snub nose. I have it in my hand, my arm straight down, and I saw they had a peephole there, but they wouldn't be able to see the gun. So I knocked on the door, and the guy says, "¿Quién es? You know, who is it?" And I said, "I need something," and I mentioned I'm a friend of so and so, and the door opens, and there's a chain there. So, for me, automatic response, I shout, police, and I hit the door with my left shoulder and snaps the chain, and I spin around and I step into the door with my right foot. Well, I'm trying to go inside, but he's behind the door and they're pushing it. So all I have is my right foot, my right shoulder, and my head in the door. And I'm like, what the? These guys were supposed to be on me like, white on rice,
Right.
And so I'm so pissed off that I turned my head to look at Rotman. I said, what the fuck you waiting for? Give me a... And by the time I turned back, bam, So, and I returned fire. I had cocked my gun, and so that it would have went off, just on reflex. So, I heard the shot, all right, right in my head, and I heard my, kind of reflex, and I went down, and then I had a whole episode. But the thing is, after it's over, I'm laying there, and my eyes are closed, and I'm thinking, crap, I got hit in the face. And strange as it sounds, ever since I was a kid, I was always worried about my teeth,
Right.
And I thought, are my teeth missing? And then I thought, small entry, big exit. Is the back of my skull missing? And then I hear somebody, actually, then I open there. I mean, you can imagine the state that I'm in, because there was a point where Arthur, whatever the fuck his name is, Caesar, he's got my scarf and he's like dabbing at my face, and I says, "What?" I couldn't talk anymore, and so I'm going like, he wasn't applying direct pressure, he was dabbing, and then I don't know, my eyes got closed or something, like I was drifting, and the next thing I hear, don't worry, you'll be all right. I called police. I don't know if he said I call ambulance or, but anyway, I opened my eyes, and there's this old man, gray-haired, and I often thought, he was like Castaneda's Don Juan, or sometimes I wonder if, he was my guardian angel or what, but I saw this guy was there. I heard him, and I saw him, but Rotman and Caesar were nowhere in sight. And then I hear somebody's coming up the stairs and keys jangling, and I figured, and just at that time, there's two uniformed cops, and I hear one of them say, I think he's a narc. So one guy puts his arms under my arms, and the other guy, he's between my legs, and he's holding me at the knees. and we go down the stairs. And I remember, because I had my 9mm in my belt, and I thought, shit, I'm thinking, I don't want it to fall. And my arms were just like flailing on the side, but I managed to get my arm up and feel that it was there. And that, any long-time members on the job know how your gun becomes like a part of your muscle memory.
Right.
But anyway, and then there was a kid, as we went out the front door in the lobby, he looked down at me and he says, "How you doing, officer?" And I thought, what the hell was that about, Anyway, and then they put me in the car, full speed ahead. The recorder, he was had his knees on the seat, bent over his seat, holding me so I wouldn't fall off the back seat. And, they got me to the hospital, and that was it.
Jesus. Ladies and gentlemen, you may hear what sounds like thunder sometimes in the background. There's nothing wrong with the audio recording. That's I live close to Nellis Air Force Base out here in Las Vegas, and the jets are coming over, and they're just the noise limit will not stop it. So that's what you may hear, something like thunder, and that's what it is. Frank, I gotta get into this book. Now, I got to say something, ladies and gentlemen. There's nothing funny about Frank getting shot over 50 years ago, attempting to do a drug bust in the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn. Frank was left with, he's deaf in one ear. He walks with a limp and everything. Those are what he was left with for what he did that night. He received the Medal of Honor, the NYPD's highest award for bravery, in 1972, and he retired shortly thereafter. But I'm not making light of Frank's incident, because there's nothing funny about, like I said, somebody being shot, a police officer. But, ladies and gentlemen, this book here that I'm holding up over here, okay, it's a freaking disgrace, the chapter on Frank Serpico. It's to the point of being ridiculous, where I was laughing at points when I was reading some of these pages. It defies any logic, even from somebody who's not a police officer. And I'm going to, just go through some of these things here and elicit a response from Frank. Frank, one thing I want to say is, during this drug operation you were doing, you did not have portable radios. In other words, portable police radios where you're communicating back and forth with each other. Is that correct?
Yeah. I never had one, and I don't know towards the end if some of the patrol guys might have had these big freaking almost look like walkie-talkies, but we didn't have anything. No.
The reason why I'm saying that is in the book here on the chapter, and he says this is a book of fiction, the author's imagination. That's what he says, but it's not, because here's the chapter here. I'm showing it on the camera. Frank Serpico. And is relating in here that, there's two things I want to bring out first. First, he says that he has the fictitious name of the where the location happened. He doesn't have the right location. He's using a fictitious address. He's not saying 778 Driggs Avenue, apartment 3G. He says something else, fictitious, and also the names of the people involved, other than Gary Roteman and Daly, the other officer that was with you, that was outside, and you. Those names are in this chapter. But he says here that when they were talking to the informant before this deal was going to go down, that the informant told them, meaning him, I guess, and Rotman, that's what he says here, is that the person you were going to go to the house to attempt to get in and make the buy and then go in and arrest them had an arsenal in the house. He actually says he had artillery, he told us, a shotgun, a rifle, handguns. Did they tell you before you went to that door that they were aware through the informant that there were weapons inside the house?
No. And I heard somewhere else at some point, they also asked me that somebody had heard that the informant told them that he had a gun, but they never told me he had a gun or anything.
Okay. Then he goes on in the book and he says that when you're watching the deal go down in the apartment, when you were hiding like up on the stairs, that you got on the police radio and gave them the description over in other words, the walkie-talkie. So for people to use a vernacular, a walkie-talkie. And you would give them the description of the person that was at the door making the buy before you went to the door. So you didn't have portable radios, you didn't have walkie-talkies, but he says in here that you were communicating with them, meaning you were at the stairs, they were, outside and on radio. So that didn't happen because you didn't have portable radios. So he puts that in the book. But he goes on. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. It's like a 10-page chapter. And then he goes on and he says that, I'm going to actually read something in here because it's the only way I could describe it. It's the point of being ridiculous. Oh, here he says, if Frank's on the radio, now you're describing the suspect. Quote, one Puerto Rican male, 20 to 25, 5'9", blah, 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 155 pounds, show the lane. So he's saying you're on a portable radio with him. Now, the reason why I'm bringing that up, and now you're telling us you didn't have portable radios, is if you have portable radios and he's on the talk channel, there's also a dispatch channel. So when you got shot, what was all the commotion about trying to find some way of notifying the police that an officer was shot? They could have just switched over to the other channel and said 1013, which people don't know in New York City is officer down. Everybody goes to that call, 1013, officer down. So you didn't have a portable radio, but in the book he says that there was. So that's another thing over here. Then he goes on in the book to the point where this is going to get really ridiculous, and he says, okay, he's at the door. Let me read this over here.
And by the way, there were two of them. I wasn't one. There were two buyers, so that were together. They went up and down. So go ahead. You were sorry to interrupt. You were saying.
So I'm just.
What's his version?
Okay. Then he goes and he says that he didn't understand. Him and Rotman didn't understand Spanish. So he's telling you that when you getting ready to go in the door, when the deal's whatever, you have to tell us in Spanish when to go, because we didn't understand Spanish. Yet he has a whole page in here of Frank conversing with the Spanish guy inside the apartment, and he's got here the guy saying, "Come on, man, give me the money," and not the money. So if he doesn't understand Spanish, how did he get all this dialogue into the book? That's another thing. And I know some of these people may look at this and say you're nitpicking, but I'm not.
Hey, Doug, you said earlier you didn't want to make light, but, I laughed my ass off. There's nothing in here. I was just laughing my ass off that anybody who was a cop and worked in narcotics could be so stupid, because in that same book, he's got me saying that I'm going to quibble with the dealer. Who the hell ever made a buy and quibbled with the dealer?
Right.
You got that part over there?
Yeah, it's in the book. He's saying that I'm just going to take out of context instead of reading the whole thing, but that the dealer's saying, do you have the money, the price, and you're going to do this and you do that. And you're right. I worked undercover for many years. And if you're going to make a buy, if the cocaine back then that I was buying was $100 a gram, it was $100 a gram. You're not going to sit there and bargain with the person, especially on something like this, where all you want to do is make the buy so you can get into the apartment and make the arrest because it's a crime in progress, and you don't care about negotiating with the dealer inside the house. So that's another thing that you pointed out, and I looked in the book. And he goes on in the book. He says, now you're saying this is the police. So you've told the guy this is the police. This is what he says in the book. As he said it, Frank pushed on the door and hit it with his shoulder to get inside. As soon as I heard, this is the police, I rushed towards the door and tried to push it open, striking the door with my hands just above Frank's head. The chain holding the door to the door jamb broke away. Gary Rotman hit the door to my left. The door was halfway open, but we couldn't gain entry. And then he says, Gary said, I'm going to get a running start, so he stepped back from the door. This whole thing is not the way you said it went down. Then here's where I got to. This is funny, folks. Okay, now at that moment, while Rotman is now going to do a running start to the door, what I don't understand is this scenario that happened to you, Frank. It happened to me several times when I was undercover when we were trying to get into houses, and when the suspect is behind the door and you have the door open, and then you're going to go in and say, police, we're going in. My partners, the people with me, they're like a fly on shit. That door almost is coming off the hinges. Everybody goes through the door, and that didn't happen that night. Well, let's just go on to this book here. Okay, now this I think is freaking hilarious. Okay, now Gary's going to do a running start because he couldn't get into the door. Now, he says, ladies and gentlemen, at that moment, someone came running out from inside the apartment. So, and that's the last time he says anything about this ghost that came running out of the apartment. But if somebody came running out of the apartment, that means the door was fully open, unless somebody is 6 inches thick. And he doesn't say if it's a male, it's a female. Where did this person go? Upstairs, downstairs, disappeared into thin air. So at that moment, someone came running out from inside the apartment. As he says, Rotman was going to do a running start to the door. He doesn't mention anything after that of where this mysterious person or ghost went. And Frank, let me ask you a question. Did anybody come out of the apartment?
No. How could they come out? I was standing right there. The chain was there till I broke it. But, if I may say something, when you're making up a scenario that didn't happen, I mean, these guys are not smart enough to, be able to cover the bullshit that they're telling. And so who knows where they're pulling this stuff out of. As you'll see, that's not the only fabrication that they make up, and who knows? Yeah, but absolutely nobody, and as you said, who was this guy? I hadn't gotten shot yet, so it wasn't my spirit leaving, or it wasn't the old man that was there. Where are you getting this guy from?
Well,
and why didn't somebody ask him? But anyway, go ahead.
No, that's what I'm saying. Okay, he's already says before this, in the beginning of the chapter, like I said, that the informant told him the people in the house had artillery, shotgun, rifle, handguns, and now, as he says, his other partner, Gary Rotman, is making a running start to the door because they can't get it open. The door opens and someone came running out inside the apartment. He doesn't say anything about this ghost of where he went. Now, I'm going to say this for a point here because I'm going to read something else in about a minute. Now, you're at an apartment door. You're going to go ahead and try to make the buy so you can get into the apartment. And somebody comes running out, but neither he or his partner have their guns drawn and stops the person in a house that is a drug house. That's where the dealers are. So he just puts that in there. At that moment, someone came running out from inside the apartment, and he doesn't elaborate any further on the rest of the chapter and the rest of the book of who this person was, because it's just ridiculous to the point of being, it's insane. It's funny. You got 3 cops. You're not shot yet. Somebody comes running out of the apartment where the dealer's in. Nobody stops him, or she, or whoever it was, and nobody has their gun out. It's crazy. Then he goes on, he says, now, after the person comes running out of the apartment, a shot rang out, and Frank slumped to the floor. He said, I reached over and grabbed him under his armpits. I tried to pull him out of the doorway, but I couldn't budge him. So now he said, for some reason, you're stuck. But my point being is this. If you're going to believe this BS that's in this guy's chapter, if somebody came running out of the apartment, that means the door had to be pretty much wide open. So none of this is making sense. And then he goes on. Gary, after you're shot, hits the door again. But my thing is, why would Gary have to hit the door again if he said the person ran out of the apartment, then he got shot because the door would have been already open, yet you're still budged in the door because he can't get you out of the door? Makes no sense. Then he goes on. A second shot rang out, and Gary went flying back. I mean, Gary Roteman. I looked back at Gary. Gary's now laying on his back on the floor motionless. This is what Caesar says. So now his other partner, you're shot. He's back. He thinks he's shot. And he even says that. He goes, I thought to myself, quote, what a hell of a mess this is. Yeah, no shit. Wait a minute. Let me finish here. One partner is shot, and I can't drag him out, meaning you. My other partner is shot, and I can't help him either. So now he thinks Rotman's shot also because he's laying on the floor. He's out motionless. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Caesar's gun is not out. After all this happened, a mysterious person comes running out of the apartment. Frank gets shot. He thinks his other partners have got shot because he falls back on the floor. Then he says, I turned back to the door and saw a hand holding a gun coming out of the apartment. I took out my weapon and shot toward the hand. So, according to his own writing, he didn't have his weapon out when the mysterious person ran out of the house. He didn't have his weapon out after you got shot. He didn't have his weapon out after Gary Roteman, he thought he was shot because he's laying on the floor motionless, but then he takes his gun out.
Can you hold that thought a minute?
Yes.
Can you hold that thought a minute? This brings some light into what happened here, okay? So, when, as I said before, the perp fired at me and hit me, and I returned fire. So those were the only two shots, back to back, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So now I know what happened to Roteman. He probably fainted and shit his pants. That was the mess that, Caesar is saying, what a mess I'm in. What a crock. I mean, this is what I mean. These guys were cops. They made detective, and it shows you how the quality of the cops that they call New York's finest, and it's going to get better as you read. And what happened, because the perpetrator got away. He got away out the back window with two friggin' cops there with guns, and they let the guy escape out the back window. So I don't know what the hell happened to Roteman. He couldn't have hit his head anywhere. In fact, I hit my head on the corner there because there's the corner going down the stairs. To my left, there's nothing at all that he could possibly. So he must have fainted or, fallen back. Who knows? But go ahead.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, while we're talking here, I'm putting stuff on the screen. And as you see, I had on the screen several times even now, is the photo, that's the police photo, crime scene photo of 778 Driggs Avenue, apartment 3G. You can see the blood on the floor. And as Frank described, you could see the stairway where the wall was, where the other guy was supposed to be, officer, the partner was supposed to be. And then the left of that door, you see the other apartment door where I guess Caesar was, okay, wherever. But like I said, when you do an operation like this, and the whole purpose is to try to make the buy to get the apartment open so you can get in, your partners, once that door is open, there's no hesitation. They should have been there with him. All three should have been through that door. That did not happen. We know that happened. Frank relayed how he got shot, and that did not happen. He had to turn around and say, what are you waiting for? There is no waiting, especially, ladies and gentlemen, since he says in this book that he wrote that they knew the people inside that house had artillery, rifles, shotgun, handguns. And the whole thing that he wrote in this book, in this chapter, okay, on Frank Serpico, is it defies logic. To any person with any common sense, even if you're not a cop, you're going to read this stuff and say, wow, all this stuff is going on. He still doesn't have his gun out. His partner's laying on the ground. He thinks his partner's shot. Frank's shot. And then I take my gun out because I see a hand coming out of the apartment. Again, it goes on and on. Now he says...
Well, let me interject here, Doug, because no hand ever came out of the apartment with a gun, okay? I was in the apartment with a gun. The perp was inside. I fired inside, and I dropped my gun when I got shot. And the door got closed because he was behind the door, and there was some other guy in there behind the door. That's why I couldn't get, after the chain broke or whatever, there was resistance. So now the door is closed. But let's assume, like he says, the door opens and a hand comes out. I don't know how this is going to happen because the door opens inward, okay? And as it opens, it faces a wall. So it would be impossible for anybody to stick their hand out. Now, I don't know if he was some kind of I don't think he was that good a shot, but I'm an expert. I've qualified all the time, and I wouldn't shoot for a friggin' hand. I'd empty my friggin' gun into the door.
Right.
And why he and his partner didn't do that beats the shit out of me, because the guy escaped unscathed except for where I hit him in his hand and wrist, because it glanced his hand and wrist, and he escaped out the back window.
Right. And you hit the suspect. You hit the guy before he ran out the window. Was your gun that hit him?
I hit him because I had him covered. He was right behind the door, and I'm standing there, and I see the guy, and I got him covered. That's why I was waiting for them to push the door open. And as I said, I lost it. I should have never taken my eye. They tell you, never take your eye off the perp. But, when you're in a situation like that and you're feeling, your subconscious is working, this isn't looking good.
It's, I can't for the life of me why one of your partners would have written an account in a book like this that's completely, for lack of better words, ridiculous. It's total bullshit. And then he goes on. Now all this happened. He says, I heard a loud yell and heard two people running toward the back of the apartment. I pulled Frank, and this time I was able to drag him away from the apartment door. And one of the tenants on the floor opened his door and peeked outside. Call the police, I told him. Tell him a police officer needs help. Tell him to send an ambulance. No mention in here of the Spanish guy that you said came out and helped you. And something else I want to mention, because this contradicts also the NYPD police reports that I had up on the screen a minute ago, and I'll put them up again. But then he goes on. So this guy that he told to call an ambulance goes back in the apartment. I didn't hear any noise from the apartment. Then he says, I look back at Gary. He was still lying on his back, motionless. There's blood all over the place. I looked at Frank and saw that he'd been shot in the face. I took out my handkerchief and applied direct pressure to the wound with my left hand, but kept my gun in my right hand covering the door. Now, I'm going to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, this contradicts to what the police report says from that night, and I'll get into that in a little bit. So then he says, it seems like an eternity had passed, blah, blah, blah. And then he turned towards Gary, and he saw Gary stirring, moving. He says, Gary, are you all right? And Gary says, yeah, I'm okay. I must have banged my head. It hurts like hell. Because he says Gary's now on the freaking floor. So anyway, now, if you're okay, let's get some help. Frank's been shot. Go into that apartment, I said, pointing. I know someone's in there, meaning he's saying the other apartment, because he said somebody peeked out and told him to call the police. Then Frank stirred and said, are you trying to smother me? Because he's tapping your face, what he says, like you mentioned that before. And he's, okay. Then he goes on here. Now, all of a sudden, cops come. Now, Frank, when they took you from the stairwell, and I got it still on the photos up on the door, the two cops that took you to the hospital, how did they take you down the landing, the stairwell? How did they take you down to the car? How did they do that?
I already told you earlier. One guy had me under the armpits, and the other guy had me under the knees. No chair.
Okay, well, that's not what he says. He says they went into the other apartment and got a chair and put you in the chair, and they carried you down in the chair, which to me sounds like, why the hell would you waste all that time? Like you said, you just pick somebody up and take them down when your partner's shot. So that's.
Well, another question is, why the hell did they wait for the cops to show up? Why couldn't they take me to the hospital in their car?
Absolutely. At this point, the way you said it went down, you were there, you're the one that got shot, is you're shot, and they got suspect in the apartment. The first thing is life preservation, okay? Forget about the suspects at that point. Life preservation is get your partner away from that door, down, and get him to the hospital. And that's an NYPD. They even do that to this day. They take the officer, they don't wait for an ambulance. They put him in a car, and they take him to the hospital. But we know that didn't happen. And I'm not going to read the rest of the thing verbatim, but basically what he says, he goes on and on. Frank, they took him to the hospital, and then they told us to leave. And then I was back at the precinct, and he's getting grilled by, inspectors about he's asking them. And then he calls us Inspector Green, which I think is a fictitious name. Inspector Green came in. He wanted to know the whole story. And he said, well, screw you. I'm going to get something to eat. If you want to know what happened, ask all of them. So you've been shot. This is your partner. The inspector wants to know the whole story from him, and he's telling the inspector, you get screwed. I'm going to get something to eat. Yeah. And then he said they all heard it 100 times. And then the last, ladies and gentlemen, he closes out this chapter. This is freaking amazing to me. This is the last sentence. Gary and I walked out before anyone could say another word. We went to the nearest restaurant. We both had eggs over easy, fries, toast, and coffee. That's the way he ends that bullshit chapter in his book when his partner is shot after telling the inspector, screw you, I'm not telling you anything else, X other people, I already said what I had to say, and then they go get something to eat.
In other words, mission accomplished.
Yes. And
fucking thugs.
I'm reading the police report. I have a couple of pages. I had it on the screen. And the police report, first of all, it's a freaking disgrace, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, I had it on the screen. I'll put it on again, the 3 pages that I have.
By the way, Doug, I had never seen that report. They never showed it to me. And the way I got that report, it was sent to me. That's why it's hard to read. It was an email from Katz's nephew. Now, Katz, as you will explain, you'll say who Katz was, but go ahead with the report, which looks like it was typed with 2 fingers by some grammar school kid.
That's what I was going to say. It's got mistakes in it. It's typed on a typewriter. Things are marked out. But then at the top, it says, Patrolman Caesar, fired as chief special, fired several times. That's what he says. Officer Rotman, fired several times. Patrolman Serpico, chief special, 38 caliber, fired once. What kind of a police report puts in, they fired several shots? Fired several times. How many times? Where did they fire? How many rounds were expended from their handgun? I don't know if there's other reports that are missing from this, but it's just, to me, for a report like this, when a police officer was shot, it's,
Doug, I don't even know if ballistics responded. They never recovered anything. Look, I know where those rounds went. I've heard, gunfire when I was a cop in the precinct, that guys went and fired into the coal bin, and then said they fired their guns so it make their arrest look better so they can get put in for medals. But I don't know where the fuck they fired those guns. It certainly wasn't towards the perp or that door at that particular time. Now, as you said, that is supposedly official report. Then go on with what happened where they found out where the perp was now holding up.
No, before I get to that, that's Maxwell Katz who got. Before we get to Max Katz who shot the Echeverry when he escaped, and they got him early the next morning. But I want to say something. In this police report, lady, that's up on the screen, those three things, you can go back and screenshot them if you want. There's no mention in here of what Caesar wrote in his book. There's no mention about somebody ran out of the apartment. Wouldn't that be something pertinent that would be in a police report? And would somebody who was investigating this would have said, well, who ran out of the apartment? Where did they go? There's three cops out there. Frank's not shot, and you just let somebody run out of apartment. That was the dealer is inside. No mention of that. No mention in the police report, ladies and gentlemen, that they're on the screen here. It's hard for me to keep going back and forth with this stuff, but in there's no mention in this police report that Rothman was laying on the floor and that Caesar thought he was shot, like he writes in his chapter. And listen to this, ladies and gentlemen. This is from the police report. Patrolman Caesar called for an ambulance, and Patrolman Rothman and Caesar demanded entrance and were informed by the occupant of apartment 3G that the gun was out of the apartment. Well, that makes no sense to me, because it says in one sentence, okay, Caesar called for an ambulance. Doesn't say where he called for an ambulance, how he called for an ambulance, but in Caesar's book, he told Rothman to get help. And Rothman supposedly went into an apartment, but this is now totally different than he writes in the book. So Patrolman Caesar called for an ambulance. How? Where? And then and Patrolman Rothman and Caesar demanded entry into the apartment. So when did that happen? Did that happen after he left somewhere to call an ambulance and then came back and told the people to get out? Now, this is total bullshit, people, because why would you be demanding entrance when a cop's shot, people are still in the apartment, you go through the fucking door, excuse my language. This is in the police report. This is the NYPD police report, one of the reports. Frank, it pisses me off because it's just freaking crazy. Anyway.
Well, Doug, I want to say something here, and if I remember, I'm going to say it throughout this interview. If New York City Police Department can cover up a shooting of one of their own, imagine what they do with other shootings. This was, as far as I know, one of the biggest police cover-ups of a policeman being shot in history. And that's why I hold them responsible to this day. They have never apologized, and they've put me on their shit list ever since.
Frank, it's, over the years I've read a lot of stuff. And there's other versions that people put in books that weren't even there, that defy logic. You were there, you're the one that got shot. You relayed how it went down, but what's in that book, in that chapter that he wrote in 2013, Iron Men in Blue, is, in my opinion, total bullshit, defies logic, defies imagination, police tactics, and a lot of stuff like I just went on. There's more stuff in the report that I'm not getting into, but it's total contradictory to what's in the police report, and even the police report opens up the door for a lot of questions. It's like, this is what's written in a police report for an officer who got shot, and it's freaking sad. Anyway, go on, explain what happened with Maxwell Katz, because he's the actual officer.
No, I'm not going to say that, because I want you to read, isn't that in the report? When they go, when Mambo escapes, and they follow there's a blood trail, and now he's barricaded in another location. Isn't that in the report?
Yes, on the bottom, let me start on the bottom of this one page here. It's hard to see. The undersigned detective, whoever that is, because that's kind of blacked out here, I can say it. The undersigned detective, in company with Detective Maxwell, Lieutenant Connell, responded to Brooklyn North Borough detectives and signed out 2 shotguns, vest, and blah, 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 because now they're on the hunt for Echeverria and the other guy that ran out the back window of the apartment 3G after you got shot.
All right, hold that thought now. This is for, professional police officers. A police officer has just been shot. You know the perpetrator, and he's holding up. Who should respond to that? I don't think they had SWAT teams in that day, but we had
emergency service squad.
Emergency service, all kinds of weapons and stuff. What the hell is narcotics doing handling it? I'll tell you what they're doing. They're covering it up, okay, or trying to cover it up. Now, go ahead with what happens.
Okay, so and a good point in that because
by the way, there's something here that is very confusing. I think you were confused about it too. You just said Maxwell. Now there were in a report that is not Katz. Maxwell Katz is the good guy in this. There was another guy, I don't know what his first name was, but his last name was Maxwell.
Yeah, that's Arthur. I'll read that and say it's Arthur. I want to get back to something you said on emergency services. Back in the early 70s, I was still in high school, and my friend that lived on the same block as I did, his name was Robert Kennedy, like the senator got shot. His brother was an NYPD police officer in the at the time was the 64th precinct, which was the precinct on Gelston Avenue that covered our area in Bay Ridge, and it later became the 6-8, but it was a 6-4 at the time. It was at 86th Street and 5th Avenue. That's where the old 6-4 precinct was. And my friend's brother, I forget his name, he was an NYPD police officer in the 6-4 precinct assigned to the emergency service squad. And he used to take sometimes the car home with him. And it was back then it was like a Ranchero station wagon, and they had all the equipment in there anyway. So I'm just bringing that up because they did have emergency services unit. Anyway, let me read this report here. This is another one. Let me just read what it says here. Confidential information. It disclosed that the perpetrators of this crime, meaning the ones who shot you, were at 142 Rodney Street in Brooklyn, in the ground floor apartment. At 02:15, February 4th, 1971, so the early morning hours after you got shot of the next day, let me just read it without putting my thing in here. At 02:15, February 4th, 1971, the undersigned detective, in company with Detective Arthur Maxwell, responded to this location and forced the door of the building open, and again had to force open the front door of this apartment, where the undersigned and Detective Maxwell entered with shotguns. As this detective entered this apartment, a shot was heard coming from the rear of this apartment, and Reuben Tarrats was one of the people that escaped with Echeverria from the apartment you were shot at. Reuben Tarrats was running from the kitchen, which is located in the rear, towards the detectives, and was now apprehended. And other officers were requested to hold this prisoner, while Detective Wasser, W-A-S-S-E-R, and Detective Maxwell entered the rear bedroom, which is adjacent to the kitchen, where Edgar Echeverria, that's the guy that shot you, was on the floor with 2 guns, something typed over. It was observed at this time that Echeverria was wounded in the abdomen and right hand. Both guns were recovered by Detective Wasser and Maxwell, and this perpetrator was immediately handcuffed. Further investigation revealed that this perpetrator, Echeverria, see, now here's what doesn't make sense. Now They're saying this. Further investigation revealed that this perpetrator, Echeverria, was shot by Patrolman Maxwell Katz, K-A-T-Z, number 22854, ND7, who positioned himself outside in the rear yard of 342 Rodney Street and observed this perpetrator attempting to escape via the rear bedroom window with a gun in his hand, pointing said gun at Patrolman Katz, who fired once with his off-duty chief special, this wounding this perpetrator. Perpetrator Echeverria was taken to Greenpoint, a hospital. So he was at the same hospital you were in. That's where you took you to Greenpoint. So Katz is the one they say shot him. So go ahead, Frank. You want to make a comment on that?
Yeah, well, that part is correct. Now, what an example of all these assholes you're talking about, there was one good guy in there because, first of all, as I said, you got a cop being shot and narcotics cop responds, he says there's two, then there's others. I don't know, I wasn't there. But Katz explained to me that he was off duty at the time and he had heard on the radio that a cop had been shot and he rushed into work and he was off duty at the time. And he took the initiative on his own to cover the back window. Now, if you're New York's finest, why the hell didn't you set up, you didn't know there was a back window there? He would have escaped out the back window again for the second time, and he would have been gone. Now, Katz was there. He was coming out the window. He shot him once. And so when I met Katz, when I got out of the hospital, he said to me he had to go before the honor board or something to get a medal. And he said to me, you know, Serp, if it was anybody else but you, I would have got the Combat Cross. Now, the Combat Cross is the next in line after the Medal of Honor, and he would have well deserved it for what he did, except he just got, like a commendation.
Wow. He actually told you that?
Yeah.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm putting this on the screen again. I had it there before, so I want to put some up. I think this is the first time the public has seen this. This is, Frank sent me this photo before we went on the podcast, so I got it into the software so we could see it. I'm going to zoom in on it and take myself out of there. That's the, Frank will tell you, that's his 38 Chief Special with the pearl grips. And I see, Frank, it's the top part of the grip showing is damaged. When did that happen?
Well, that happened that night, either when I dropped it or if the perp had it in his hand again and he would have dropped it. I don't know. It's, yeah.
And this is the gun. So, I want to bring something up because in the movie, that's what a lot of people, even cops, in the movie, it shows you going through the door, trying to get to the door with the 9mm Browning, high power.
Yeah,
and
that
didn't happen.
That's what pissed me off about Sidney Lumet and Pacino. I don't know whose idea it was. First of all, it was the wrong 9mm. I had the Browning 14-round clip, and I didn't have those huge sights on it, which would have been very cumbersome, in your clothing.
Right.
So I don't know where they got that prop gun, and fucking Pacino, he can't get his hand in the door. What is he trying to squeeze his hand in the door for and get scratched? I mean, that is so friggin' stupid. Where the hell was there, what do you call those guys that are supposed to,
the technical advisor. Technical advisor.
Advisors. And, it's just totally stupid. And that now has been, how long has that been out, that movie? Over 50 years. It's still going strong.
Right.
People think that's what happened and a lot of numbnuts cop also think that's what happened, and that's what's wrong with corruption.
It's
So
well, just so you know, that chief special that you used, that's at the beginning of the program. You see me when they did that interview with me. I think that was Inside Edition or Current Affair. I don't know which one it was. When I'm firing at the gun at the range, I'm firing the same thing, the snub nose 38 Smith & Wesson Chief Special. That's what I carried when I was working undercover. Later on, I got a 9mm when we were doing search warrants and stuff. But the Chief Special, it's a close combat weapon. It's not going to shoot somebody across the street with it. It's a close combat, like you called it, a belly gun. And the other gun that I used to carry, which wasn't authorized but nobody knew, was a 25 caliber small automatic, semi-automatic, and I had that in my boot. But I always carried that 38 Chief Special. That was my off-duty gun. I carried it when I was working because it was it's easy to conceal. You can put it in your belt and put your shirt over it. You didn't even I never even had a holster. So anyway, that's just trivia.
When I was still a patrolman, I had this big 4-inch another Smith & Wesson service revolver, and I carried the chief off duty, and I didn't even carry extra rounds. And one night I was coming home, and I witnessed, I was on my motorcycle. I was taking my girlfriend home from a movie, and I stopped for a light, and I heard some shooting, and to my right, I looked, and I saw some blazing guns going, and so I told my girl to get behind the pillar. I was on Broadway under the L in Brooklyn, and the car took off, and I pursued it, and at one point, they had pulled over, double parked, and one guy got out, and I saw he had a gun in each hand, but he was just had his arms down. I think he was going to dump them in the lot there, because there was a lot, and I had rolled up my motorcycle. I turned my light out, and I took cover on the trunk of a car, and I stationed myself with that same gun covering the guy. I knew they were Spanish because they were talking at the scene when there was the shooting. I heard a lot of yelling and shit, and I said, "Policía, levante la mano," and the guy turned around and he started running, and I fired a warning shot. Back then, we could fire a warning shot, and then it was like, holy shit, I got 4 rounds left, and but when I fired it, it was a good thing because the car took off and left him running. So I ran after him, I glommed him, and he actually had 3 guns and a pocket full of ammo because they had just smoked this guy. And it was kind of funny, and because I got the guy and literally by the collar, and there's a lady walking a dog, and I say, excuse me, ma'am, but I'm a police officer, and would you please call the police? And she said, well, if you're a police officer, how come you don't know there's a call box on that lamppost? And I said, oh, thank you, ma'am. And anyway, and that after that, I thought I'm going to carry some extra rounds, and so a little aside there.
Let me thing I want to ask you here, and we're at an hour and 10 minutes. I don't have enough time left on the podcast, but I want to get into. We get anything else you want to talk about? I want to get into, ladies and gentlemen, holding the book up over here. Hang on, let me get that thing off the screen here for a second. Okay, this is a novel.
I think we should cut it, Doug, and save it for next time because, I'm not as young as I used to be, and we got to get into James Fife, the police expert, who totally fictionalized the night I got shot. And why would a police commissioner in charge of training at the police academy and Patrick V. Murphy, his sidekick, and John Jay College of Criminal Justice and Fife's wife, none of them would respond to me about the lies that he told in his book. So, what are you looking at now? Tannenbaum?
Yeah, we'll talk about the next podcast. I'm holding it up for the people. It's that's the.
Yeah, I think we should close this because I'm running out of steam.
I don't blame you, Frank. It's this was very interesting because that's what people wanted to hear on the emails that I get. They want to hear you talking about the night you got shot, and then of course, like I said early in the podcast, we just found out. I found out about that book, and then you got it. I think last week, and the book is it's a comedy. I mean that's what it is, and it's actually freaking sad.
Self-published. It's like a comic book. It's like. Anyway, were you about to say something when I cut you off?
I forgot. I guess it wasn't that important, but we'll talk.
All right,
we'll talk on the next one.
Anyway, in closing, here's an interesting fact that I don't think anybody has ever heard before. Do you know what your serial number was on your chief?
No. Well.
Well, on my chief, I had my patrolman shield number. Those numbers were my serial number on the chief, plus an extra 5. Now, how many people have that on their, serial number for a gun? It was just meant to be my piece, I guess.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's the first time I think that the people have seen that. It's the first time I've seen it. I've never seen the photograph of the weapon, so I have that up on the screen. Okay, Frank, we'll call this one quits for right now, and said we'll do another one because we got a lot of stuff. I want to get into the Tannenbaum book and then the other books, and we want to talk about Joe Tromboli and Robert Lucy, and you knew him, the Prince of the City, and all that stuff, and get into that. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to the Doug Poppa podcast for Wednesday, February 15th, 2023. As you all know, I'm an independent investigative journalist, former law enforcement officer. I worked 18 years in the casino industry. I used to write for the Baltimore Post-Examiner out of Maryland. I did about 350 stories for them. If you want to support my independent investigative journalism work, you saw on the banner going across the screen as we were doing the podcast. It's paypal.me/Doug Poppa. If you want to call me up with tips or you want to say anything, do not send me BS and nonsense because I'm not going to respond to it. But do you have anything legitimate, professional you want to get out? Comments that you want Frank maybe to address on the next podcast? It's a Doug Poppa podcast at gmail.com. So once again, Frank, thanks for coming on the show. It was very educational, and a lot of stuff came out that we wanted to air out, and I think we got that out. So Frank, you have a good evening.
Yes. Yeah, you too, Doug. Thank you, and good listening to your listeners out there. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Frank. That's it, ladies and gentlemen, to the next podcast. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Remember, audio podcast available on iHeartRadio and Spotify. We'll see you on the next one.
Lawman sacrificed his badge for justice.
Poppa knew a secret that could free a man wrongfully imprisoned for shooting his ex-wife. But when Poppa stepped forward, he was cut down by his own police department.
All this stuff's going in my head. Should I call up to the defense attorney? Okay? And I knew if I did that, holy hell would break loose.
Deputy Sheriff Doug Poppa used to be one of the top cops in rural Loudoun County, Virginia. Deputy Poppa feels he's been busted himself. He lost his job as a narcotics investigator, he says, when he told an ugly truth about a 4-year-old crime. The truth about how his own department and the local prosecutor allegedly ignored key evidence and may have sent an innocent man to jail.
I testified, and everything changes.
What Deputy Poppa testified about was an attempted murder in 1987.
They deliberately withheld evidence that should have been given to my defense attorneys.
Bill Birch is the prosecutor Deputy Poppa accused of ignoring the evidence.
He says, I told the prosecutor, I told Mr. Birch that this woman said, I'm going to shoot myself if need be, and I'm going to make it look like my husband did it just to ruin his life. Did he say that to you? No, he did not.
But this November, the court believed Doug Poppa.
Oh my goodness, is this the reception committee?
And on Valentine's Day, William Carter was released on a $50,000 bond and given a new trial.
This man usually puts people on trial in this courthouse, but in a rare turn of events, the Loudoun County Commonwealth Attorney was called to the witness stand. William Birch was asked to respond to allegations that he pressured a witness to lie in earlier court proceedings.
No, sir.
A woman who lived at the Carter mansion the night Carol Vandergrift Carter was shot 5 years ago testified that the prosecutor coached her to withhold testimony about the gun involved.
I certainly did tell him about that it was a .38.
I don't recall her saying anything about the gun, the .38 caliber, anything like that.
He's lying to cover his tracks on the last trial.
The high price one cop is paying for telling the truth.
After serving more than 4 years behind bars, Carter was on the edge of his seat when the verdict was read today.
We, the jury, on Each's joint, find the defendant William Douglas Carter not guilty.
After he audibly thanked the jury, Douglas Carter could not contain himself. The tears flowed.
I came out and testified in November of 1991 at the habeas corpus hearing, and again in January. I was suspended for 10 days without pay, and I ended up being fired after 12 years in this department.